discussion here.
Comment on the President-elect's comments about it.
Okay. CNN has just published a story, and I'm telling you this about a news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true or not, but CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community provided documents to the President-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. These documents also allegedly stated, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now, again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so, you know. But if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious. And if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Very well. Without divulging sensitive information, do you know about this or know what compromising personal and financial information the Russians claim to have?
Senator Franken, allegations get made about candidates all the time, and they've been made about President-elect Trump lots of times. Most of them, virtually all of them, have been proven to be exaggerated or untrue. I would just say to you that I have no information about this matter. I have not been in on the classified briefings, and I'm not a member of the Intelligence Committee. And
totally
so I'm
fair.
just not able to give you any comment on it at this time.
Okay, totally fair. Last week, Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, claimed that the Russian government was not the source of the hacked emails WikiLeaks published during the campaign, that they published during the campaign. Now, Assange did not identify his source, nor did he say whether his source worked with or received information from the Russians. But again, American intelligence agencies have concluded the Russian government directed the hacking operation. Nonetheless, immediately following that interview, President-elect tweeted, quote, Julian Assange said a 14-year-old could have hacked Podesta. Why was DNC so careless? Also said Russians did not give him the info, exclamation point. Senator Sessions, does it concern you that our future commander-in-chief is so much more willing to accept what Julian Assange says instead of the conclusions of our intelligence agencies? And why do you think President Trump finds Assange trustworthy?
Senator Franken, I'm not able to answer that. I've not talked to the President-elect about any of these issues, and it is often inaccurate what gets printed in the papers.
Well, back in 2010, back when WikiLeaks was publishing stolen American diplomatic cables and military secrets, you voiced concern about the Obama administration's response. You said that WikiLeaks publishing sensitive documents should be, quote, pursued with the greatest intensity. You said, quote, the president from on down should be crystal clear on this, and I haven't seen that. I mean, he comes out of the left, the anti-war left. They've always glorified people who leak sensitive documents. Now he's the commander-in-chief, so he's got a challenge. President-elect Trump, by contrast, said, quote, WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks. Do you believe that by holding up Julian Assange, who traffics in leaked and stolen documents, often classified documents, as a legitimate source of information, that President-elect Trump is glorifying people who leak sensitive documents?
Well, I will say this, that if Assange participated in violating the American law, then he is a person subject to prosecution and condemnation.
Well, we know that in regard to what he did in 2010, and yet the president-elect said, WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks. Doesn't it seem like perhaps if you weren't sitting before us today as an Attorney General nominee, and if President Obama was publicly embracing Julian Assange, that perhaps you might take a more critical view?
As a member of the Senate, as you and I remain for hopefully not too much longer, depends on you and your colleagues, but I feel it's a lot easier to be vigorous and outspoken. If you begin to think about the awesome responsibility of serving as an Attorney General with the possibility of having to handle certain cases, you need to be more cautious about what you say. So I think it's just not appropriate for me to be the person for you to seek political responses from.
Senator
Okay,
Cruz.
I am out of time. I will try to stick around for one more quick round.
Okay, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sessions, thank you for your endurance today. Thank you. Let's turn to a different topic, one that's been addressed some in this hearing, but one that I know is a particular passion of yours and one on which you built a remarkable record, and that's immigration. And I want to focus in particular on the problem of criminal aliens in the United States and this administration's non-enforcement of the laws. And take a moment just to review some of the numbers, which you know very well, but I think it's helpful to review for those watching this hearings. We have had an administration that consistently refuses to enforce our immigration laws. So in October 2015, ICE admitted that there were 929,684 aliens present in the United States who had been ordered to leave the country, but who hadn't done so. And of those over 929,000 aliens with removal orders, 179,027 had criminal convictions. In addition to the 179,027 criminal aliens with final orders of removal, there were at least 194,791 known criminal aliens who were at the time in removal proceedings. And we also know that 121 criminal aliens released by ICE between fiscal year 2010 and 2014 went on to commit homicides. And between fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 2015, ICE released 6,151 aliens with sexual offense convictions from its custody. My question for you, Senator Sessions, is can you commit to this committee and to the American people that as Attorney General you will enforce the laws, including the federal immigration laws, and you will not be releasing criminal illegal aliens into the public, especially those with violent convictions such as homicide or sexual assault convictions?
Senator Cruz, you and I have talked about this, and you know that I believe we have failed in dealing with criminal aliens. President Obama set that as a priority, but I don't think they've been as effective as needed. I believe that should be increased and stepped up, the priority of that. The actual policies, as you know, are Homeland Security policies. The Secretary of Homeland Security will determine those policies. There are ways in which the Department of Justice can fulfill a role in it, but the overall policies and priorities would be set by Homeland Security. I just believe that as we go forward and we reduce the flow of illegal immigrants into America, then there are few people illegally per investigative officer, and you get a better handle. You're in a virtuous cycle instead of this dangerous cycle that we're in today where things tend to get worse. So I believe we can turn that around. This is one of the policies that has to be given priority. Donald Trump has also said that he believes criminal aliens obviously should be the top priority. and all of us, I believe this government will work effectively to deal with it. I would do my part.
You know, there are few issues that frustrate Americans more than the refusal to enforce our immigration laws. And not too long ago, I was down on the border in Texas, visiting with Border Patrol officials, visiting with law enforcement, local sheriffs. And I'll tell you, it was after the election, and there was a palpable sense of relief that finally we would have an administration that didn't view the laws as obstacles to be circumvented, but rather an administration that would be willing to enforce the laws in the books and stop releasing criminal aliens in communities where the citizens are at risk. You know, one of the most tragic instances that we're all familiar with is Kate Steinle, beautiful young woman in California who lost her life, who was murdered by a criminal illegal alien who had 7 prior felonies. And yet, over and over and over again, the system failed. And young Kate Steinle lost her life in her father's arms, saying, "Daddy, please save me." You and I are both the fathers of daughters, and I cannot think of a more horrific experience than having to hold your daughter at that moment of agony. Can you share, this has been an issue you've been leading for so long, can you share your perspective as to the responsibility of the federal government to keep the American people safe and not to subject the American people to murderers and other repeat felons who are here illegally, not to release them to the public?
Senator Cruz, you touch on the right issue here. First and foremost, the immigration policy of the United States should serve the national interest, the people's interest. That's what an immigration system should do. And number two, under the laws of world agreements, that if a citizen from a foreign country is admitted by visa to the United States and they commit a deportable act or otherwise need to be removed, that country has to take them back. And when they cease to do that, then you have a serious breach of collegial relations between the two countries. And no country, particularly the United States, should ever allow so many individuals who committed crimes here, often when they entered illegally and not even coming on a lawful visa, and they need to be deported promptly. And the reluctance of that to happen is baffling to me. It should have total bipartisan support. It's said that it does, but for somehow it's never accomplished. So it's very, very frustrating. So the basic summary of that is it's perfectly proper, decent, and correct for this nation not to allow people who come here on a visa or illegally to remain here after they've committed crimes.
Well, thank you, Senator Sessions. And as you know, I've introduced legislation in the Senate, Kate's Law, which would provide for those who illegally re-enter with a violent criminal conviction a mandatory 5-year prison sentence. This past Senate, that failed to pass. It is my hope that Congress will pass that legislation and give additional tools to the administration to keep the American people safe. Let me turn to one additional aspect of illegal immigration, which is the national security component of it. Since August of 2015, you and I have joined together to send 3 separate letters to the Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, and State, as well as a letter to the President, seeking information on the immigration histories of individuals who have been convicted or implicated in terrorist attack in the United States. And over again, the current administration has stonewalled our efforts as senators to get basic facts that I think the American people are entitled to. You and I were able to piece together from the public record that at least 40 people who were initially admitted to the United States as refugees were subsequently convicted or implicated in terrorism. And more broadly, of a list of 580 individuals who were convicted of terrorism or terrorism-related offenses between 2001 and 2014, at least 380 were born in foreign countries, many from terror spots in the Middle East and Africa and Central Asia. And of the 198 U.S. citizens you and I were able to find on that list, at least 100 were born abroad and subsequently naturalized. As I mentioned, the administration has stonewalled us. Will you commit to work with this committee to provide the data that we've been seeking, that I think the American people are entitled to know, of those who are committing terror plots against us, how many are coming in through a broken immigration system, through a broken refugee system, and to working with this committee to prevent that from happening in the future, to keep the people safe?
I would do that. I do believe that's the Homeland Security primary responsibility, but it was a bit frustrating because what those numbers tend to indicate, it indicates that it's not true that refugees don't commit terrorist acts. There is a danger even in the refugee population, and good vetting is critical in that process.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sessions, if I might, I'd like to take us to an area I don't think has been explored much today, but of grave concern to me, which is disability rights. Another area where, if confirmed as Attorney General, you'd be charged with protecting among the most vulnerable Americans and those whose rights have only recently been fully recognized and enforced. You've previously said that the IDEA, which provides for access to education for those with intellectual disabilities, creates, and I think I quote here, lawsuit after lawsuit, special treatment for certain children, and is a big factor in accelerating the decline in civility in classrooms all over America. And in a different setting, you were critical of the Supreme Court's decision in Atkins versus Virginia in 2002, which held that executing individuals with intellectual disabilities violates the Eighth Amendment. In a floor speech 6 days later after that ruling, you said that you were, quote, very troubled by the court telling states, quote, they could not execute people who were retarded. If a state was scheduled to execute someone with intellectual disabilities, would you insist on the Justice Department now taking vigorous action to stop it? And given your previous comments about the IDEA, do you still believe it unfairly benefits some children and hurts others?
We made real reform in IDEA. I led that effort. We ended up having the vote of Hillary Clinton and Dick Durbin, Senator Durbin. We worked on it very hard, and I was very pleased with the way it worked out. It was true that the IDEA community pushed back against the reforms I was proposing, but in the end, I think it worked out fine. And the reason was that the burden was on the school systems. I was in a blue ribbon, great little school in Alabama, the first day of school, and the principal told me, it's now 3 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, I will go to a meeting with lawyers and parents about a child on whether or not they will be in the classroom all day or half a day. And the child had serious disabilities. So he said, I'm trying to get this school up and running, and I'm having to spend this extraordinary amount of time on this. So we created a legal system that made it better. And the schools got a little more deference in being able to monitor it. And it was a big issue. It was a disruptive force in big city schools in New York and Chicago and other places like that. So on the question of intellectual disabilities, I suppose we can disagree as a matter of policy. Perhaps I was questioning the legal mandate, but it depends. A person with intellectual disabilities, that should be considered as a factor in the sentencing jury or the judge's opinion before they go forward. But obviously, if a person knows the difference in right and wrong, historically, they would be held to the same standard, even though their intellectual ability would be less.
Let me revisit a question about consent decrees that Senator Hirono was asking about previously, because consent decrees have been used in this area in disability rights to make sure that folks with intellectual disabilities have access to services and education, but also in policing. Police chiefs and elected officials, as we've spoken about, in communities across the country, have in some cases invited DOJ to open civil rights investigations of their police departments and have invited them to enter into consent decrees in order to implement reforms to law enforcement in order to make sure that they improve the quality of police-community relations and respect for civil rights. Do you plan to continue to assist cities with these investigations when asked, if Attorney General? And under what circumstances would you commence a civil rights investigation of a law enforcement agency that may have violated federal law?
Well, those are difficult questions for me to answer explicitly today, but I would note on the consent decrees or the language Senator Rono quoted, I believe was in a booklet of which I simply wrote the forward on. I don't believe that was my language. Consent decrees have been criticized in a number of areas, but with regard to the disabilities community and the police departments, I guess you're asking about, I'm not familiar with how they've worked out in the disabilities arena, but with regard to police departments, I think it's a good thing that a police department might call on federal investigators and a team to work with their police department to identify any problems and to help select remedies that the community might feel were more valid because the Department of Justice validated them and agreed to them. So as I think you and I talked, it really is important that the people trust the department, police departments, and the police departments have respect from the communities. And when you don't have that, crime is people's safety is at risk.
Well, I hope we can find ways to continue to work together to combat violent crime and to improve police-community relations. Let me just briefly ask you about trade secret theft and intellectual property, something we've also talked about. There is a significant problem for American inventions, companies, entrepreneurs of having their innovations stolen, sometimes by cyber hack, by intrusion, sometimes physically or through industrial espionage. The Obama administration's made real progress in increasing enforcement and in going after those who would steal America's inventions. Is that something that you would intend to continue, vigorous enforcement to protect American inventions?
I do. I think a lot of that may be through the U.S. Trade Representative. It could be done through Commerce Department and other departments, and the Department of Justice may have a role in criminal activities or civil enforcement. I would not, excuse me, say for certain what that role would be at this point. But my view, as you and I have talked, is that you're correct about this. When we enter into a trade agreement with a foreign nation, what we have to understand is that's just a simple contract. And if we'll comply, we'll deal with you on this basis. And if your partner to that contract is not acting honorably, then you have every right to push back. And if it ultimately means you have to pull out of the agreement, then you pull out of the agreement if it's serious enough. I don't think we've been as aggressive as we should have been in those agreements.
Let me ask one last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to reflect on something you said in your opening and something we have talked about. You were born in Selma roughly 70 years ago. I've been to Selma several times with Congressman Lewis and a number of others. And last year, many of us joined Congressman Lewis for the 50th anniversary of that famous march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge when he faced violence, and the response, the conscience of the nation was stirred by this horrible event. And it spurred Congress to pass the Bipartisan Voting Rights Act. There's been a lot of questioning back and forth about your comments about whether the Voting Rights Act was intrusive and the Shelby County decision. And I just wanted to make sure I came back to an important point, which was that Senator Leahy and I and a number of others tried hard to find Republican partners to advance the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would have replaced the now 50 years old, roughly, pre-clearance formula with a new one that would be national in scope, would not disadvantage any region, and would be simply based on enforcement actions. Previous questioning by, I think, Senator Franken and others focused on recent enforcement actions. The Fourth Circuit finding that North Carolina's post-Shelby voter ID law violated the law because it targeted African Americans. You said in your opening statement that you witnessed the civil rights movement as it happened near you, that you witnessed the depredations of segregation. And in a ceremony last year during the presentation of the Congressional Gold Medal to the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, you said, "I feel I should have stepped forward more." What more do you think you perhaps could have done or should have done in recent years as a senator to take more active action so that folks from around the country could have confidence in your commitment to continuing the journey of civil rights in this country?
Well, I don't think we have to agree on everything. Just because you think this was a necessary thing, you may be right, and if I don't think so, I don't know that I'm wrong, not necessarily wrong. I would say that I did sponsor the Congressional Gold Medal Act that gave the gold medal to the Selma and Montgomery marches with Senator Cory Booker.
Yes.
We were the two lead sponsors on it. I was at that event and have a wonderful picture I cherish with John Lewis and other people on the bridge celebrating that event. It changed the whole South. Voting rights were discriminating, African Americans were being discriminated against systematically. They were being flat denied through all kinds of mechanisms, and only a very few, in many instances, were allowed to vote, if any. So this was an unacceptable thing. As I said at the hearing in 1986, I was asked about it being intrusive. Please, Senator Coons, do not suggest in any way that that word means that I was hostile to the act. And I said then and I say now, it was necessary that the act be intrusive because it had to force change, and it wouldn't have happened without the power of the federal government. That is a plain fact.
Senator, what I'm suggesting is an alternative path forward for the Voting Rights Act that would not have been singling out one region or one state or one history, but that would have allowed the Voting Rights Act to continue to be effective in the face of the recent record showing ongoing discrimination, ongoing denial of the right to vote in different states across the country, now no longer isolated to the South. When presented with an opportunity to continue and strengthen the Voting Rights Act post-Shelby, you didn't take that step.
Well,
Senator Sessions, if you need to answer that, go ahead and answer it.
I'll be short.
I want to go to Senator Blumenthal.
As I said, I supported the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act with Section 5 in it. When the Supreme Court said it was no longer necessary that Section 5 be in it, I did not support the language that you offered that would basically put it back in, you and Senator Leahy. So I don't apologize for that. I think that was a legitimate decision. And with regard to the question of voter ID, I'm not sure it's been conclusively settled one way or the other whether a properly conducted voter ID system is improper and discriminatory. Indeed, the Supreme Court has held that voter ID is legitimate, at least under certain circumstances.
Okay, before Senator Blumenthal, I have another thing that has come to our attention, so I would put this in the record without objection, a letter that we received from some lawyers about the IDEA issue. These lawyers litigate cases on this issue. They say certain stories about the issue took Senator Sessions' comments out of context, and then they go on to note that Senator Kennedy and others later reached an agreement with Senator Sessions on the issue. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sessions, I want to pursue this conversation about voting rights. In October of 2015, there was a report, widely reported, that the state of Alabama intended to close a number of DMV offices. Congresswoman Terry Sewell wrote to the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, urging an investigation stating, I'm quoting, "This decision will leave 8 out of 10 counties with the highest percentage of non-white registered voters without a Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, to issue an Alabama driver's license." She noted that, quote, "an estimated 250,000 Alabamians who do not have an acceptable form of photo identification to cast a ballot," end quote. As you know, subsequently, the Department of Transportation initiated an investigation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that year-long investigation found that Alabama's conduct caused, quote, "a disparate and adverse impact on the basis of race, end quote. Did you believe, or do you believe now, that it was a problem that 250,000 estimated citizens of your state did not have the requisite ID to vote?
There's a system, I understand, that makes those IDs available. The driver's license offices were part of a budget-cutting process within the state, which I had absolutely nothing to do with and did not advise and know about until it was done. And they claimed that they were simply identifying the areas with the lowest population and trying to do some consolidation and trying to make the system more efficient and productive. It was later these objections arose, and they have reversed that, I believe. So that's the way that went, I hope, and think there was no intent at the time to do an to be racially insensitive, but indeed, many of the closures were in counties with large African-American populations.
Did you believe then that there was a problem in denying 250,000 people an access to photo identification they needed to vote?
Well, it didn't deny 250,000 people the right to vote. That would be utterly wrong and should be stopped immediately. It just simply, maybe the closest driver's license office would be in the next county, and it would be closer for you to go to that one than the one that was closed. But it was, in general, perceived as detrimental to African Americans, and included within that detriment was the possibility of an ID for voting. So you are correct. It was controversial, and it was fixed.
Did you agree with the Department of Investigation finding that it had an adverse and disparate impact on people on the basis of race?
Well, I've never expressed an opinion upon it, and I never studied that issue in depth, but apparently somebody must have agreed because it was changed.
Did you agree with that conclusion?
Well, yes, I was happy that that solution was reached, yes, very much.
Did you take any
No
action?
need to have, we should remember those things as we move forward setting policy. What kind of ramifications could it have? I don't think they had voting in their mind at all, but it did impact voting to some degree, for sure.
But you took no action at the time, you expressed no conclusion at the time, despite what was found to be a disparate and adverse impact on the voting rights of 250,000 members of the citizens of your state.
Well, they didn't ask my opinion before they did it, and it was purely a state matter, and I did not actively intervene. You're correct.
I want to ask you about the DACA young people, the Dreamers, who have submitted information to the federal government about their whereabouts, their identities, a lot of personal details. And I know that your response, I think, to a question about it was that Congress must act. But wouldn't it violate fundamental fairness, whether due process or some standard of constitutional due process, to use that information, in effect, against them? Obviously, we're not talking about a criminal proceeding, so there's no double jeopardy. But I guess I'm asking for your commitment as a prospective Attorney General, your respect for the Constitution, to make a commitment that those young people will not be deported, that you will continue that policy that has been initiated.
Certainly, you're correct that that cohort of individuals should not be targeted and given a priority. Anything like the priority should be given to criminals and people who've had other difficulties in the United States, those who've been ordered deported and had final orders of deportation. So I understand what you're saying there. I think until I've had a chance to think it through and examine the law and so forth, I would not opine on it. myself. Number two, importantly, this is a policy of Homeland Security. They've got to wrestle with the priorities of their agents, what they should spend their time with, and try to do that in the most effective way. So General Kelly will have to think that through. I'm simply would be, if some matter were litigated, we would try to be supportive of the litigating position if possible. So really a Homeland Security question.
I understand that Homeland Security may be involved, but ultimately orders to deport are the responsibility of the Department of Justice to enforce. You are the nominee to be the nation's chief law enforcement officer. And more importantly, in some sense, you're a source of the nation's conscience, legal conscience. And so I'm asking you, as a prospective United States attorney, whether your conscience would be violated by using information submitted in good faith by countless young people who've been in this country since infancy, many of them, and who trusted the government of the United States of America to give them the benefit of that policy articulated by the President of the United States. You may have disagreed with that policy.
Well,
but the submission of that information in good faith on the basis of representations by the United States of America, it seems to me, involve a prospective commitment on your part in representing the United States of America.
well, you make a good point, and that's a valid concern. I know of no policy that would suggest that something like that would be done, and I would not push for it, but ultimately the decision would be made by the Homeland Security Department. They decide their priorities for enforcement, and then there's a question of whether or not I just wouldn't want to be in a position to say that would never be used. And I can't make that commitment today. I haven't thought it through as to what laws might be implicated. But if somebody were a terrorist or had other criminal gang connections, could you never use that information? I don't know. I'm just not prepared to answer that today. It may not be possible to use it.
Well, I recognize, Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I'll pursue this line of questioning again because I feel I'm midway through a number of questions. Thank you, Senator.
Before I call on the senator from Hawaii, I'd like to note that Pat Edgington, former vice chair of the Alabama Democratic Party, wrote to our committee in support of this nomination. Mr. Edgington says, quote, "I truly hope our party will not make this vote on party lines, but instead vote on the man," end of quote. Quote again, "I have known him for approximately 40 years, and while we have had our policy differences, I know his instincts are fundamentally humane and just." I'll, without objection, enter that in the record. Senator from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our Muslim American community is gravely concerned about what a Trump presidency would mean for them. So can the Muslim Americans count on you as Attorney General to protect their constitutional and civil rights?
Yes.
Thank you. Very reassuring. I had asked you earlier about consent decrees that relate to police departments. I have a question along those lines, but it involves another part of civil rights. In 2015, a federal district court in Alabama, your state, approved a consent decree order filed by the Department of Justice in the Huntsville City Schools case. And this was a school desegregation case. A number of other school districts throughout the country are under desegregation orders. Would you commit to maintaining and enforcing those decrees?
Those decrees still remain in effect in a number of districts. Huntsville is a very strong, healthy, and well-managed school system. I'm actually, I believe they have good leadership. But a consent decree remains in effect until it's altered by the court.
So your answer is
They would
yes.
be enforced until there's an alteration of it, yes.
Thank you. I have a question about violence and the increasing number of threats against providers of healthcare services and abortion services to women. Since the November election, the number of threats online, many of them online, against the providers have more than tripled. Given the increasing numbers of violence targeting abortion providers, how high of a priority will it be for you to prosecute violence targeting abortion providers under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act?
They deserve the same protection that any entity, business or otherwise, or a healthcare entity is entitled to when people violate the law and carry out improper threats or blockades of their business.
Well, where there is...
Maybe even more so because we have a specific law about abortion clinics, I believe.
Yes, so there's a specific law that Congress passed that protects access to these clinics, and where there is evidence of increasing number of threats of violence, I hope that gets on your radar screen as a priority for enforcement. Yes?
As the law is to be applied, yes. I don't know exactly how the threats are worded, but it's improperly done. They can be subject to criminal prosecutions, and they would be evaluated properly in my administration.
And certainly where Congress cared enough about this particular area of access, that I hope that you would have a commitment to making sure that that law is being enforced in the way that we intended. Regarding birthright citizenship, people born in this country are U.S. citizens regardless of the citizenship status of their parents. And there are those who argue that that is not enough to confer citizenship. Do you believe that there should be more required to become U.S. citizens?
Well, under the current state of the law, it's accepted that they do obtain their citizenship, so I suppose that would not be, there are two obstacles to changing that. One would be you would have to have a congressional enactment, I believe, to change it, and even that congressional action could be construed as violative of the Constitution and not be a constitutional act. So those, I have not reviewed the details of that. I do know there's some dispute about whether or not the Congress could change that status.
But it's certainly not anything that, in the order of priorities, that you would pursue as Attorney General to ask Congress to change the law to require more than being born in this country to confer U.S. citizenship.
I would be focusing my attention on enforcing the laws that exist, and I guess it would be Congress's duty to wrestle with whether to change it or not.
On turning to a change in the law that came about after the Lilly Ledbetter case. It's the Lilly Ledbetter Act, and I know you're familiar with the factual circumstance in which Lilly Ledbetter did not know that she had been given disparate pay that was illegal, and she didn't find out about it, and the Supreme Court said you only have 180 days in order to find this out in order to have your day in court. So Congress had a bill which you voted against, and I'm wondering why you voted against that bill, because in making that decision, the court basically abrogated years and years of legal precedent. And it was a surprise to a lot of us that suddenly they were imposing 180-day, you must know kind of a requirement, but you voted against that bill. Can you tell us briefly why?
We had a hearing on it in the Judiciary Committee. A number of witnesses testified, and the testimony, as I understood it, was that she did, in fact, have notice, and the court found that she had notice, and that's why they had that statute of limitations was enforced. You need a statute of limitations of some kind. And if they don't know, then you can allow it to continue indefinitely. But as I understood, that was the ruling, so it was less problematic for future cases than was discussed. But my recollection is not perfectly clear on that issue. But that was one of the factors I remember being involved in my decision.
My recollection of the holding in that case is different from yours, because often in these pay discrimination cases, unlawful pay discrimination, the victim is not aware and has no way of finding out that such discrimination is occurring, and that's why the law made it very clear that every instance of a disparate paycheck would constitute a new violation. And that's all this bill did. Otherwise, the Lilly Ledbetters of the world would really be foreclosed from their day in court. So you obviously have a different understanding of the holding of the case. So
As the, well, I'm reluctant. My memory is not that good. But if you have explicit notice, hypothetically, should the every paycheck for the next 20 years be told the statute of limitations? So that's was the legal question. However, my recollection is not perfect.
I was very concerned about that case, and so I'd say that perhaps my recollection of the holding is more accurate than yours. Let me turn to corporate wrongdoing. When I just met with you, you indicated that nobody is above the law, and there is, I think, an ongoing investigation on the part of the Department of Justice on what Wells Fargo did and basically defrauding millions of their customers. So would you continue to pursue this kind of investigation, and would you also hold accountable individual corporate office holders for, should there be found to have been a violation of law?
Corporations are subject as an entity to fines and punishment for violating the law, and so are the corporate officers. And sometimes it seems to me, Senator Rono, that the corporate officers who caused the problem should be subjected to more severe punishment than the stockholders of the company who didn't know anything about it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Franken, you said you had one more question you wanted to ask.
Could I ask two?
Go ahead.
Oh, hey, by the way, the chairman, I must compliment you. You have deferred your time to us all, and I thank you.
I haven't given it up. I've just given effort.
No, you deferred it.
Please proceed. You're taking time.
Okay. Senator, I'd like to briefly return to something you said earlier about your opposition to VAWA in our courtesy visit. The second item of substance that we discussed was violence against Native women. I told you how important the issue is to me and to tribes all over the country. They've highlighted it for me time and time again. And when I provided with you with a statistic demonstrating just how prevalent violence against Native women is and at the hands of non-Indians, you expressed shock and said that you didn't realize the extent of the problem. Over 84% of Native women experience domestic or sexual violence. Over 97% of them are victimized by non-Indians. That's a recent stat. But in 2012, all you had to do was talk to one tribe, and you have learned that women in an Indian country are regularly abused by non-Indians who go unprosecuted and unpunished. If you take the issue of domestic and sexual violence seriously, I think it's incumbent upon you to visit at least one tribe. I think Alabama has 9 tribes that are recognized in the state. Is that correct?
Well, only one tribal group that I believe only one tribal group that has properties, tribal lands.
Porch?
Porch Creek.
Yeah, yeah.
We used to be in my district. I've had good relations with them, been on that small tribes, tribal lands a number of times and visited their clinics. And
Okay, good. Well, I would, you know, if you are Attorney General, and even if you're not, but certainly if you are Attorney General, when you're back home, you might take some time to talk to them about this issue. Earlier, you told Senator Hirono that you can't commit to not challenging VAWA on these grounds, but you've also admitted that you didn't understand the gravity of the problem of violence against Native women when you voted on it in 2013, or the extent of non-Indian violence. Would you just commit to me to spending a little bit of time with the Porch tribe? Thank you. That'd be good.
They've been supportive of me. And
thank you. I want to talk one last thing.
You got one more question. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The day before the election, candidate Trump came to my state for his only rally during the campaign. And let me tell you what he said. He was standing before a large crowd, and he accused Democrats of planning to, quote, import generations of terrorism, extremism, and radicalism into your schools and throughout your communities. Here in Minnesota, he said, you've seen firsthand the problems caused with faulty refugee vetting and large numbers of Somali refugees coming into your state without your knowledge, without your support or approval, and with some of them joining ISIS and spreading their extremist views all over our country and all over the world. I can't begin to tell you how angry those comments made me. To see candidate Trump hold his only rally in Minnesota at an airport where about 1,000 Somalis immigrants work, Somali Minnesota immigrants work and earn a living, refugees, really. And to stoke that kind of fear and hatred was an insult, I believe, to every Minnesotan. It was offensive, it was irresponsible, but it wasn't really surprising. Candidate Trump made scapegoating immigrants and refugees and banning Muslims from entering our country a centerpiece of his campaign. Now, some of his advisors tried to spin or walk back his comments on the so-called Muslim ban, but you, Senator, no, you said that the idea was, quote, appropriate to discuss. And in June, you said, quote, we must face the uncomfortable reality that not only are immigrants from Muslim-majority countries coming to the United States, radicalizing and attempting to engage in active terrorism, but also their first-generation American children are susceptible to the toxic radicalization of terrorist organizations. You said that our nation was, quote, has a, quote, unprecedented assimilation problem. You know, Senator, part of what makes that assimilation challenging is when people seeking to lead this country exploit fear and anxiety and redirect that fear toward our immigrant and refugee communities. Right after the election, my office got a call from a middle school teacher in St. Paul. Her school has a very sizable population of Somali Americans, Somali Minnesotan kids. Now, they're smart kids, so they've been paying attention to the election, and they were terrified. The teacher called my office and said, please, please have Senator Franken come to the school and give them some assurance. These kids did not know what to make of a country, their country, electing a leader who describes them and their families as worthy of hatred and suspicion. So I did my best to alleviate their fears that day. I told them, you're Americans. I said, you kids, you're Americans. Don't be afraid. And a couple weeks later, I talked to the French ambassador to the United States. I said to him, who's defined as a Frenchman in France? And he said somebody who can trace back a couple centuries to their family in a French village. Well, these kids are Americans, and we consider them American. And what we saw in Paris, and what we saw, which was caused by Belgians, is because they take that attitude in Europe. We don't take this attitude, and it's dangerous to take it. One of the most beautiful events I've been to was the graduation, high school graduation in Wilmer, Minnesota in June. And I invited myself there because one of our pages, our Senate pages, was from Wilmer, and she's Somali, a Somali Minnesota girl. And I saw her on election day. I was at the University of Minnesota. She graduated, went to the University of Minnesota. She told me her sister, her younger sister, was named the Wilmer Homecoming Queen. In Europe, they don't assimilate people. Here in the United States, we vote them homecoming queen. Thank you.
Senator Tiller.
They are Americans.
Oh, Senator Sessions, if you want to respond, go ahead.
Well, I think Senator Franken makes some important points, and I appreciate his comments.
Senator Tiller.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Although I
Chair.
do believe my comment was unrelated to the event in your state.
Senator Tillis, you're entitled to 10 minutes since your first round, but you don't have to use it all.
I've learned nothing else except to understand what the chair
I
means
want
when he says
to
something.
do my second and third round.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm
wait
not
till
going to
everybody-
take long. And Mr. Chair, you know, and Senator Sessions, I think that you know that I was in Tennessee today with a proud moment of seeing my father sworn into the legislature.
Thank you.
However, I got up and watched the opening comment, your opening comment. You did an extraordinary job. And to be honest with you, I think you've demonstrated more stamina today than the Crimson Tide did last night against a worthy adversary. But Senator Sessions, I'm not going to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to tell you I thank you for your leadership. I think you and I have talked about this before, but I want to thank you again publicly about your leadership as a balanced chair, and I think, as the late Arlen Specter said, an egalitarian. I've seen you sit on the Immigration Subcommittee, and you've seen me come to every one of those meetings, and you know you and I have a difference of opinion on that matter. What's remarkable about you is you bring balanced panels to discuss the issues so that both sides can be heard, and you never, ever hesitated to let me speak as long as I want to, which I'm sure was a lot longer than you wanted me to. And I really appreciate your leadership because that's what's missing oftentimes up here in the Senate. And we're going to miss you. And I'm going to look forward to voting for you and for your confirmation. I asked the same question of the Attorney General that was before this committee last year. I want to ask you because it's very important to me. I think that the Department of Justice has issues. I think that the Inspector General's report is a good example back in 2014 when I simply said an Inspector General's report that says that they need to increase accountability in the Department of Justice, and I'll get to a specific question in a minute, that we should act on it. I got a non-answer to that question. In fact, I got a better answer to a deputy who came back in, which is why I supported the deputy, and I didn't support the AG nominee. Can you tell me if you've had an opportunity to take a look at those recommendations and to what extent those recommendations would be instructive to you now that you become the chief, when you become the chief executive of that agency?
I'm glad you raised it. I hope you'll stay on the Department of Justice to respond to it. I have not studied it. I had some time ago, I believe, a briefing on the nature of it when it came out. But it does appear to me to raise fundamental questions about the good management of the people's money. And that money needs to be managed, every single dollar, effectively, to get positive results, not wasted. And I will be glad to hear any suggestions you have, and it will be a priority of mine.
Thank you.
You're the
Senator
second or
Sessions.
third person that's raised it, and so I think what we need to do, and I will do, is to do an immediate analysis of it if I am so fortunate as to be confirmed.
Thank you, because we'll be following up on it. This is something I think is very important to me, and really a specific question in that regard. I hope you look at it, and when you get confirmed, make it a priority to look into. As a part of the report, I believe it was said that some DOJ employees engaged in prosecutorial misconduct and who perjured themselves in court. If you find that to be substantiated, what would you do with the people in the DOJ who were guilty of such actions?
The Department of Justice is a great institution. Most of the people are people of the highest character
Without a doubt.
ability. However, we've had a series of problems over time that seem to me to be worthy of concern broadly, and I think it would be important for the next Attorney General to try to revitalize and reemphasize the absolute commitment that a federal prosecutor must have to do justice and not just win a case. And also, it is hard for lawyers in Washington who get sent out to the field to try a big, important, high-profile case. They don't know the community very well. Maybe they haven't tried as many cases as Assistant United States Attorney in the field that's doing every day. And sometimes their skills don't meet their academic levels that you might think they would have. And things kind of go wrong. We need to do better.
Well, thank you for that. Also, just by way of comment, the chair lifted a stack of letters that remained unanswered by the current Attorney General and the DOJ. He did cite that he expects you to respond at least to the one that you signed. But I hope you'll actually respond to all of them. And to the chair's credit, not only from the chair, but from the ranking member and members of this body who are trying to make the DOJ the best it can possibly be. Finally, I'll just yield back the rest of my time after saying I probably watched a good 3 hours of the proceedings today. I was struck at one point when some were casting doubt about you in terms of your view of ethnicity and a number of other backgrounds. What struck me the most about that picture on TV was your wife's eyes welling up, because she and her son know you well. Many of us know you well. And I think all of us know that you're going to make a great Attorney General. You're a fair-minded man, and you're going to obey the law. You will no longer be a lawmaker, which I know from time to time is probably going to frustrate you. But I have no doubt in my mind you will be one of the best Attorney Generals. You will faithfully execute the law. You will enforce the law, and you will do it in a fair and impartial manner, and I can't wait to see you in action. Thank you, Senator Sessions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Before we start the fourth rounds, I don't think you've had your third round, Senator Sayes.
Yes, sir.
So proceed.
Thank you, Mr.
You've
Chairman.
got 8 minutes. You don't have to use it all.
Thank you for the counsel for a rookie. I also didn't think I could talk about college football, but Senator Tillis already broke that bubble. Senator, Nebraska 1995 remains the best team in the history of college football. I think we can all agree after last night. I'd like to ask you a question about sue and settle. I've heard from Nebraskans how regulations are gamed by activists to try to change federal policy through lawsuits and settlements rather than through the making of law in the Congress. Federal agencies and activist groups are often assumed to have been sort of colluding to do this, to circumvent the Congress. And I'm curious as to what you think when plaintiffs and the government enter into a settlement to try to change policy, what's the appropriate role of the Department of Justice to make sure that that agreement does not circumvent the law and the Congress and the Administrative Procedure Act?
The Department of Justice has final settlement authority in any case against the United States, although they tend to listen to and see their role as being supportive of the agency. So if Homeland Security or Department of Education or EPA is being sued, they have the power to make the final judgment, and their responsibility is to protect the public interest, the national interest, and to make sure the law is followed. There has been in state court and sometimes in federal court this sue and settle mentality, this consent decree that we've been talking about. I pointed out that it's at times controversial. So if the agents or the officials at the Environmental Protection Agency believe that a law should be expanded, and they're sued by a group that wants to expand the law in the same way, and it may be unacceptable to expand it that far, but if the Department of Justice goes along with the agency and agrees to a settlement and get a court to order this to occur, then the government is bound by their settlement agreement, and the people's interests do. The democratic process is eroded because a decision is being made by unelected people and not the legislature. So you understand that, and I think that was a fundamental part of your question. I do believe a good Department of Justice needs to be alert to that and should not feel obligated to settle a case on the terms that any agency might think, but make sure the settlement is in the legal and justified and in the national interest.
And there have been occasions, there have been reports that's been the practice of DOJ at times to force violators to make certain payments to approved third parties as a condition of settlement. As a hypothetical, there have been discussions about whether or not a bank that was, again, hypothetically fined by the DOJ might see its penalties reduced if it made payments to a designated not-for-profit. And when, if ever, is it appropriate for the Department of Justice to require payments to any third party as a part of a settlement?
I think that's a very dubious practice. I would be cautious about it, and we'd have to make sure it's justified. And normally, that's not the best way to settle a case, in my opinion.
And finally, the judgment fund that the Department of Justice administers is a general fund that's available to compensate those who sue the government and win. Unfortunately, how this money ultimately gets used is not fully known by the Congress. Will you commit to making public the use of these funds?
The funds that are not paid out are funds that are paid out as part of a litigation.
In the judgment fund, the department has discretion to determine how to settle these cases and what payments to make, but the Congress and the public often don't know where this money goes. Would you commit as Attorney General to being transparent with where the funds go out of the judgment fund?
I would be surprised it's not public, and it should be available to the public. They should know how a lawsuit is settled and where the money went. Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator.
Before Senator Blumenthal follows up on some things he wanted to, we received a letter in support of Senator Sessions' nomination from 108 former U.S. attorneys who served under every president since President Nixon. They say, quote, "We have no doubt that Senator Sessions can do the job well, bringing to this critically important office his own unique and extraordinary strengths of courage, humility, experience, and an inviolable promise to treat all people equally under the law," end of quote. Without objection, I'll insert that in the record. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sessions, in response to Senator Tillis's, one of Senator Tillis's questions, you said that the job of the Attorney General is to do justice, not necessarily to win a case. And I think that's almost an exact quote from Justice Jackson when he was United States Attorney General. It's one of my favorite quotes. I think he said the role of the United States Attorney or a government lawyer is to do justice, not necessarily win a conviction. And that's why I feel that the role of Attorney General ought to be the legal conscience for the nation, as I was remarking earlier. So I hope that you will reconsider what you've said about the DACA policies and assert an independent view based on the nation's conscience, or what it should be, about what has happened to those young people. Likewise, on issues like Deutsche Bank, which you and I have discussed privately, and where I think there ought to be an investigation focusing on individual culpability, and perhaps in some of these other investigations as well, where an independent counsel may be necessary. And similarly, your response on recusal from votes on your prospective colleagues appointed by the president-elect, where you have not yet responded to the letter that I wrote. I'm not going to take more time this afternoon or tonight, but I think that I remain unsatisfied on those questions. And in general, I think that the role that you would have as United States Attorney General ought to be not just another government lawyer, but as a champion of civil rights and liberties and the nation's legal conscience. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, and I respect your history as a prosecutor and United States Attorney and time in the Department of Justice.
Thank you.
Senator Sessions, thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Sessions, you've been a vocal champion for American workers, especially as we have heard so much about how American workers are being laid off and replaced by cheaper foreign labor imported through some of our visa programs. You've been a co-sponsor of a bill sponsored by me and Senator Durbin that would reform H-1B visa programs by ensuring that qualified American workers are considered for high-skilled job opportunities before those jobs can be offered to foreign nationals. It also would prohibit companies from hiring H-1B employees if they employ more than 50 people and more than 50% of their employees are H-1B or L-1 visa holders. This provision would crack down on outsourcing companies that import large number of H-1B and L-1 workers for short training periods and then send these workers back to their home countries to do the work of U.S. workers. In 2013, you and I seemed to be the lone senators on this committee who fought for U.S. workers. We argued that the Gang of Eight bill that would have increased the number of foreign workers who came in on H-1B visas and actually hurt Americans who were qualified and willing to do those jobs. We said that the bill failed to adequately protect U.S. workers and neglected to hold employers accountable for misusing the H-1B and L visa programs. We tried to provide more protection for U.S. workers. We tried to ensure that no business imported foreign workers before making a good faith effort to hire people at home. We tried to expand the ability for government to audit employers. We offered amendments that were supported by the FFL-CIO. In April 2015, you helped lead 8 other senators in a letter to then Attorney General Holder, Secretary of Homeland Security Johnson, and Secretary of Labor Perez on this issue. Some of those who signed that letter sit on this panel today, for instance, Senator Durbin and Blumenthal. That letter requested that the Obama administration investigate abuse of H-1B visa programs by companies including Southern California Edison, Disney, and IBM that have been laying off American workers and replacing them with H-1B workers, in some cases reportedly making the American workers train their own replacements. The Office of Special Counsel for Immigration-Related Unfair Employment Practices is an office within your department that you will head. That enforces the anti-discrimination provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act. While the office is designed to protect foreign nationals with employment visas from discrimination, It is also charged with ensuring that American workers are not discriminated against in the workplace. Many U.S. workers advocates believe, for example, that the layoff of American workers and their replacement by cheaper foreign H-1B workers constitutes de facto nationality-based discrimination against American workers. The Obama administration has failed to protect American workers here. Will you, this is my question, will you be more aggressive in investigating the abuses of these visa programs?
Mr. Chairman, you know, I believe this has been an abuse, and I have been pleased to support your legislation and some others too that others have produced that I believe could be helpful. It needs to be addressed. It's simply wrong to think that we're in a totally open world and that any American with a job can be replaced if somebody in the world is willing to take the job for less pay. We have borders, we have a commitment to our citizens, and you have been a champion of that. I've been honored to work with you on it, and thank you for your leadership. I would use such abilities that I have to help address that. I think it also does require legislation like you have offered, you and Senator Durbin. I believe legislation may be necessary to have the kind of reforms that we need.
I appreciate your answer. We'll continue to push for the legislation. We've been very difficult moving that legislation along because of business oppositions within our country. And so whatever you can do in regard to being more aggressive in investigating the abuses of our visa programs will help solve some of the problems if we don't get legislation passed, but we still intend to pursue that. Now, on another point, as you know, relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve have been strained. You've already spoken to that in your opening comments. In many instances, police have been specifically targeted. Now, tomorrow, it's my understanding the president of the Fraternal Order of Police will testify about this issue. But I'd also like to hear from you on this point. We obviously need to figure out a way to fix these relationships and restore mutual trust and respect for law enforcement. What role can you play as Attorney General in this, and what role can the department play more broadly?
It's essential that this nation affirm those that we send out to provide public safety and affirm their good deeds. And if they make mistakes and commit crimes, then they have to be prosecuted like anyone else would who commits a crime and violates the law. But fundamentally, the overwhelming majority of our law officers are dedicated, faithful individuals serving their country and their community with discipline and integrity and courage. So I think this is an important matter. And so we need to guard against the kind of public statements that have troubled me in recent months and years, in which we seem to dismiss and take sides against the entire law enforcement community, where we suggest that the law enforcement community is not a positive factor, and that all officers are not performing in a high level. So I believe that I will do my duty to correctly distinguish between wrongdoing by individuals and the entire law enforcement community. Murders of deaths of law enforcement officers are up 10% over last year. The number of policemen and law officers who've been killed with a firearm is up, I think, 58%. Some stunning numbers, and part of this is a corrosion of respect between the communities and our law officers, and I think it's a dangerous trend we must reverse, and reverse soon.
My next question deals with agricultural antitrust, and I don't believe that there should be political decisions involved in antitrust decisions in your department. But there are several high-level agricultural mergers going on right now, one before DOJ, one before the FTC, and then there's another one I don't think's been assigned yet. And I come from the standpoint of being in agriculture with a general, just a very, I guess, ideological belief that when you have less companies, you have less competition, you have higher prices for inputs. That's in agriculture, but that'd be true of any segment of the economy. I also, before I ask this question, want to make a point that I don't think there are enough people in the Department of Justice that know much about farming. And one time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I got some administration, I don't know if it was the Clinton one or the Bush one, to say that they were going to have somebody in the antitrust department that knew something about agriculture, and I think they did put somebody there. I don't know if that person's still there or not. So this is my question. I'm concerned about increased consolidation and possible anti-competitive business practices in the agricultural industry. Currently, the Antitrust Division is reviewing several significant mergers and acquisitions in the agricultural sector. Do I have your commitment that the Justice Department will pay close attention to agribusiness competition matters and carefully scrutinize proposed agricultural mergers and acquisitions? And can you assure me that the agricultural antitrust issues will be a priority for the Justice Department if you're confirmed as U.S. Attorney General?
There's been controversy on a number of those issues over the years that I'm generally aware of. Without committing and commenting on any particular case, I will, Senator Grassley, be pleased to honor your request.
In 1986, 10 years before you came to the United States Senate, I got the False Claims Act passed. It has brought $53 billion back into the federal treasury since then. If you're confirmed, will you pledge to vigorously enforce the False Claims Act and devote adequate resources to investigating and prosecuting False Claims Act cases?
And the key TAM provisions that are part of that, I'm aware of those. I think they are a valid and effective method of rooting out fraud and abuse. I even filed one myself one time as a private lawyer. So these are important issues that you have been a leader on. It has saved this country lots of money and probably has caused companies to be more cautious because they could have a whistleblower that would blow the whistle on them if they try to do something that's improper. So I think it's been a very healthy thing, and you're to be congratulated for that, and I do support that act.
You took care of my second question I was going to ask you on key TAM. And you said that whistleblowers are very important. I'm glad to hear you say that. I don't know whether they get enough support. I hope you give priority to that because a great number of the key TAM places come from the outside, not from the inside. Will you provide Congress with this is the last point on this one, will you provide Congress with regular, timely updates on the status of False Claims Act cases, including statistics as to how many are under seal and the average length of seal time?
I would do that. And my experience is sometimes they're awfully long time. But
that's exactly why I'm asking the question, and updates from time to time I think will keep people within your department more responsive and responsible.
I understand that. And is there a report? I don't know if a report is required now, but I don't see why it would be particularly difficult to provide that to you.
Okay. I have a long lead into another question. I'm just going to ask you if you would tell us, for the record, your reasons for opposing the 2013 immigration bill.
Mr. Chairman, fundamentally, I believe that it would not end the lawlessness and it would grant the amnesty. That's the position that fundamentally caused you concern because in 1986, there was an amnesty given and a promise of enforcement in the future. and it didn't happen. And so we ended up, instead of 3 million people, I guess it was in 1986, now the estimates are we have 11 million people here unlawfully. And this is not the kind of policy a great nation must have. We need to have a lawful system that we can be proud of, that the world knows works, that people stop coming illegally because they don't think they'll be successful in the attempt, and we could see a dramatic reduction in illegality, and we could all be pleased to see that result occur, and we'll have to call on Congress to help some. But, and you understand the issue and you've been supportive, but we may have to pass some legislation. A lot can be done with current law, but I would love to be a part with this committee of restoring the immigration system to the high level it ought to be.
I want to return to the issue of Violence Against Women Act. I know that for me, that bill didn't do enough to fight fraud and abuse. That's why I introduced a substitute amendment that would have given more money to victims by fighting fraud and abuse that was discovered in the program. It would have ensured that no money under the program was used to lobby Congress. It also would have had limited the amount of funding in the program that could be used for administrative fees and salaries. In addition, my substitute amendment developed harsher penalties for federal conviction of forcible rape, which the bill that passed weakened. It also addressed child pornography and aggravated sexual assault, neither of which were addressed in the bill that is now law. Finally, my substitute amendment combated fraud in the award of U visas to ensure true victims were protected. My question, as you mentioned, you voted for my substitute amendment that was stronger in many respects than the bill that was passed. Will you enforce the law that was passed?
Yes, I will, Mr.
That's
Chairman.
probably the 10th time you answered that today, but thank you for being with me. I want to speak about the Board of Immigration Appeals. It's the highest administrative body for interpreting immigration laws, hearing appeals rendered by immigration judges. This board, which is under the Attorney General's purview, has published some very problematic precedent decisions the past several years. The Board of Immigration Appeals decisions are binding on all immigration officers, including Homeland Security officers and immigration judges, unless overturned by the position you're seeking or a federal court. Will you or someone on your team commit to taking a hard look at all precedent decisions made by this board?
Mr. Chairman, that does appear to be a power or an ability of the Attorney General, which you have not thoroughly studied. Any changes would need to be carefully done and thought out in a principled and honorable way. I would do that, and if changes need to occur, and I have the ability to do it, I will try to conduct myself properly in making those changes.
2 more points. Oversight by Congress is important. You've already said that, and I'm glad you know the necessity of that. But Congress cannot do all the oversight needed on its own. We need to rely on strong inspectors general to provide another independent assessment on the operations within the executive branch. That's why that position was set up in 1979, I believe. Do you agree that independence is a hallmark of an inspector general's integrity and effectiveness? And if you do, please elaborate. And the reason I ask the question is probably it happens in more departments, but I pay a lot of attention to DOJ, and I think there's been some problems within DOJ of recognizing and cooperating with the independence of the Inspector General.
Yes, the independence should be respected and should be had. I'm familiar with some cases in which the independence of the Inspector General is less than that in general throughout the Congress, and I've tried to strengthen, been willing to and interested in strengthening their independence. It's a challenge. The Inspector General is appointed by the agencies for the most part, I believe, but if they're not seen as independent, then they can't be the effective body that we'd like them to be. They have staffs, they have a ability to contribute to saving money, and I believe in the Inspector General's process.
Yeah. Before I ask the last question, whatever reputation I have for investigation and oversight, probably maybe even 90% of the leads we get come from whistleblowers. And whistleblowers within an agency are generally treated like skunks at a picnic. And I hope that I don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands of employees you're going to be administering over. You can't possibly know what goes on with all those employees. I hope you will give encouragement to whistleblowing and that you will listen to them. Once in a while you have a crank, but for the most part, these are just patriotic people that want the government to do what the government's supposed to do or spend money the way the government's supposed to spend it. And then when they don't get anything going up the chain of command, that's when they become whistleblowers and they come to us. And by that time, even if they're protected under law, they still ruin themselves professionally. And so I hope that you see them as a source so you can administer a better department and do what government's supposed to do. But in regard to that, I would appreciate it if you would provide Congress with accurate and timely information regarding any action taken, administrative or criminal, against individuals who retaliate against whistleblowers, because it's against the law to retaliate.
You are correct about that, and it's not acceptable to retaliate against a whistleblower. Some have been known to be cranks, as you indicated, but you cannot effectively manage this government without good citizens and good employees speaking up when they see wrongdoing. You've established a reputation as someone willing to receive that information and act on it and then defend the individual who had the courage to come forward. And we need more of that in this government.
Yeah. I thank you very much. I would like to have you and other people listen to a couple points I want to make at the tail end. I want people to know that we'll keep the record open until Monday for questions, and you know what to do with those when you get them. I want to thank everybody who participated, including those in the audience, but most importantly, thank you for your testimony today and for answering our questions and doing it very thoughtfully and very thoroughly. You performed, I think, admirably and showed this entire country what we all know from serving with you. You're eminently qualified to serve as Attorney General, and I have every confidence that you're going to do a superb job. Senator Sessions, you're excused. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9:30 for panel 2.
All right, folks, welcome to the Fox 10 News Now stream, part of Fox10Phoenix.com. See Jeff Sessions hearing. It's been a marathon session. so far on the Fox 10 News Now stream. In just about 50 minutes, we are going to be having President